Now, there is an exception. Look at number 2. Now, maybe you're sitting there and you're thinking, wait a second, I'm pretty sure we don't send these out every year. Well, it's probably because your bank is under the exception, but you need to know the exception just to be, just to make sure that you're not sending them out, but you do fall in the exception, because if you're out of the exception, then you need to make sure that you're getting this disclosure out annually. Now, there's 2 prongs to this exception. First off, there are no changes since the last time you sent out these privacy notices. Okay, so there hasn't been any changes to the privacy notice since it was last provided. Now, in most cases, the last time it was provided was when you opened the account. Or maybe it's when this exception came into place and you stopped sending out your annual notice. Well, that was the last time it went out. So the first triggering requirement is you have to have had no changes. So what does that mean? If you've changed your privacy policy, well, then you need to send out another round, and you have that annual notice requirement. You no longer fall within the exception if you have changed your privacy policy. So if that's the case, you need to get another round of privacy policies out the door. But the good news is, assuming that you meet the second prong that we'll talk about in a minute, once you send it out once for your annual notice, well, now you no longer have to send it out again, right? Because, presumably we changed it this year, we send our notice out. Next year, nothing's changed, presumably. So as long as nothing's changed, then we're back into this exception, so to speak, so you don't have to send it out annually. Now let's look at letter B. The bank is not required to provide an opt-out, due to sharing under the requirements. So in other words, we're talking about required opt-outs. When we get to the form, we'll talk about which circumstances you are required by law to give them that opt-out notice. But what we're getting at here is, if you are not sharing, so that would require an opt-out, and there have been no changes to your privacy disclosure, then you fall in this exception and you do not have to provide that annual notice. So as long as those 2 things are true, you do not have to send out an annual notice. Now, just another area of confusion, there used to be a requirement that you had to have your privacy notice available on your website, and that was part of this exception, but they actually did away with that requirement. So maybe you have the privacy notice on your website, and a lot of banks, they did, and then they changed this exception over time, and it's no longer a requirement. So if your privacy notice comes off your website, it's not a violation. It doesn't mean you have to send out annual notices. But a lot of banks, they've left it out there because it's like, well, we went through the process, we put our privacy notice out on our website. We're not going to change it now, even though we don't have to, and that's entirely up to you and your institution.